Since its debut in 1987, the Final Fantasy franchise has become one of the most critically acclaimed and popular RPG series in video game history, and one of the most fundamental and core elements to define the franchise, especially in its earlier years, would be none other than jobs. Acting as predetermined classes or roles, jobs would be a key component as the franchise built out, and it would see 6 initial roles being joined by many others, with some games even integrating jobs into the narrative. As of right now, there have been well over 100 unique jobs created in association with Final Fantasy, but some roles have made a greater impact across the franchise than others. So for today's video, we're going to dive into some of the most iconic jobs in the history of Final Fantasy, and we're going to kick things off with one of the coolest, the Dark Knight. But before we do, here's a message from the sponsor of today's video, Opera GX. Opera GX was launched during E3 2019, and it has since gone from strength to strength, carving a name for itself as a browser designed for gamers and fans of anime. There's a few reasons why this has happened. First, the customization. Opera GX has numerous color themes to choose from, but you can also use animated wallpapers, and finding new ones is quick and easy. You can also use the video pop-up feature, so if you want to watch a recap of Ultraman Season 1 before heading into Season 2, you can do so while browsing your favorite website. Opera GX also allows for easy transitioning over to its mobile version to continue playback, and doing so grants much the same experience. With the ability to listen to your favorite music via the GX player and the ability to save some time using the quick import tool, it means Opera GX provides useful utility in numerous ways. So if this sounds interesting, we'd encourage you to check out Opera GX by clicking on the link in the description below, and why not share with us in the comments below which anime you'd like to watch while you work or study. Alright, with that, it's time to talk about Dark Knights. The Dark Knight is easily one of the most interesting and impactful jobs in the series, but unlike some other jobs that will feature throughout this video, in its earlier days it was the Dark Knight's narrative focus that was the driving force behind its popularity. We first saw mention of Dark Knights within Final Fantasy II thanks to Leon. Here, we got to learn that they would wield incredible power that was harnessed through nefarious means, and although it was made into an official job within Final Fantasy III, it wasn't until Final Fantasy IV that the job was fleshed out even further. This saw more emphasis placed around narrative, and Cecil received special abilities, specific traits, and a unique array of weaponry. Those specific abilities, traits, and weaponry would then become the foundations for many future Dark Knights. Often, this would see those who adopted the Dark Knight job boast high physical stats and lower defense, with magic and speed stats varying across the different games. But perhaps the most interesting element has to be the use of dark arts. This would see the Dark Knight sacrifice HP to gain more power, with them also having the ability to drain enemy HP and MP. And both of these actions could be performed through the job's signature ability, Darkness. Their weapon of choice would be blood equipment, which could also serve as the means to siphon their opponent's HP and MP. One particular recurring weapon that stood out as the Dark Knight trademark has to be the Deathbringer, a sword or greatsword with the potential to inflict an instant kill. And then there's the wicked aesthetic. To emphasize their role as the natural antithesis and counterpart of the more lawful Paladin, Dark Knights would often don dark-coloured garbs with spiky adornments. And with all these elements combined, it's quite easy to understand why characters like Leon and Cecil have become fan favourites over the years, and why the Dark Knight has been a mainstay addition in almost every game featuring an outward job-based system, including both Final Fantasy XI and Final Fantasy XIV. For most Final Fantasy fans, the Black Mage is practically a household name. Introduced as one of the 6 original jobs, the Black Mage would be one of the forebearers of Black Magic, a gameplay element that would go on to have a presence in almost every single title, including games without formal job systems. As such, the Black Mage's function in combat was simple: use Black Magic, the discipline of offensive magic, to deal damage to foes and subdue them with status ailments. To assist with this endeavour, Black Mages would often have high intelligence, magic and spirit stats, but low physical stats. Within the earlier games, they were defined by their ability to cast the ultimate Black Magic, but once named characters like Rydia, Palom, Vivi and Lulu started to appear, the Black Mage started to expand beyond simply being able to cast Black Magic, and this notion was further enhanced within Final Fantasy XI, where the Black Mage is one of the starter jobs and most effective damage dealers. And then there was the design. The classic Black Mage would wear brimmed hats and dark-coloured robes, but many characters embodying the role would also have their own unique designs, namely those from games without set job roles. Beyond that, the influence of the Black Mage would only grow in parallel with the wider progression of the series, and it meant that outside of games, not only did Black Mages grow into an emblem for the franchise as a whole, it would also be the namesake of the rock band formed by the famed composer Nobuo Uematsu. In stark contrast to the offense-orientated Black Mage, we come to its equally iconic counterpart, the White Mage, which act as one of the most important and fundamental support roles in Final Fantasy history. The White Mage was another of the 6 original jobs, and their main task was to assist the party through the use of defense-orientated white magic. As such, it was their job to heal, buff, and revive party members, but they weren't completely without offensive capabilities, as white magic has always been particularly effective at eliminating undead foes, due to its association with the holy element. Appropriately, white mages would therefore have high magic and spirit stats, and although black mages had slightly higher magic stats in general, white mages in contrast would have slightly higher physical stats. Some of the series' most iconic white mages include Minwu, Rosa, Porom, and Aiko, and other characters like Garnet, Aerith, and Yuna would also have an affinity to this job. Regarding their design, in most games with a traditional job system, white mages would wear a white hooded cloak with red triangles adorning the edges, but like many of the other games without defined job roles, the characters embodying the white mage would also have their own unique appearances. Having featured in many games, Dragoons, sometimes known as Lancers or Dragon Knights, are arguably one of the coolest jobs in the franchise. As the name suggests, they are often associated with dragons, and unlike any of the other jobs in the series, there will be a long-running tradition of Dragoons bearing the name Highwind in some shape or form. Their first appearance would be in Final Fantasy II, and in these earlier games, Dragoons would largely focus on physical damage with their trademark jump ability. As the job evolved, they would gain access to more abilities such as Lancet, and this evolution would be seen across many noteworthy figures such as Cid Highwind, Freya Crescent, and Kamari. But perhaps the most famous of these would be Kain Highwind. His impact was such that in most games, the Dragoon's ultimate weapon would be called Kain's Lance as a tribute. The general design of Dragoons would also be aligned with Kain. It would see them donning armor with heavy dragon themes like fangs, scales, and wings, but characters from games set in more modern and futuristic environments would tone this down in their respective designs, instead bearing more subtle dragon motifs. The Red Mage has always had a certain style, and that's not just because of its cool outfit. It would essentially be a jack of all trades, having both physical and magical prowess, but the trade-off, they would never be able to master any of the disciplines. Making its debut as one of the 6 original jobs alongside Warrior, Black Mage, and White Mage, the Red Mage offered a unique twist, as it would essentially be a combination of all 3. In other words, they would be capable of decent physical performance, as well as having access to a broad selection of weaker black and white magic spells. They would, however, lack truly ample stats across the board, and could only ever use lower level equipment and spells. But regardless, their true strength shone in their versatility, and as the series progressed, they would even receive abilities unique to them, including Dual Cast. Many notable Red Mages in the series would include Alice and Ergo from Final Fantasy Dimensions, and although Final Fantasy XIII would ultimately forego the classic job system for the roughly similar paradigm system, Lightning would bear slight resemblance to a Red Mage, as her general stats would be the most balanced, and her initial paradigm roles were Commander, Ravager, and Medic. Appearance-wise, traditional Red Mages had a rather dashing aesthetic with their cavalier hats. They would usually be clothed in red, white, and black garbs, which possibly alluded to their black and white magic association, and although Red Mages could technically make use of most equipment, albeit with weaker pieces, in more recent installments, the rapier could be viewed as its signature weapon. The Paladin would become a fan favourite after it made a powerful narrative showing that was rooted in ideals relating to chivalry and protecting others. Appearing as the antithesis of the Dark Knight, the Paladin was introduced in Final Fantasy IV, and it was heavily associated with the holy element. Not only would they have a strong physical presence, what also helped to separate Paladins out from a gameplay perspective was their ability to not only execute basic white magic spells, but also the ability to use cover, which will see them take damage in place of an ally with low HP. Installments like Final Fantasy XI and XIV would further expand upon the skill sets of Paladins, allotting them abilities like Sentinel and Rampart, but even though those games have been great, it's Cecil Harvey and Beatrix who have always been the cheerleaders for this particular job. In each instance, however, and across the MMOs, due to the Paladin's association with light, they would traditionally wear armor with a lighter color scheme, usually white or silver, and in terms of weaponry, they would wield holy swords or swords with an affinity to the holy element. Some of their recurring signature weapons would therefore include Ragnarok, Save the Queen, and the Defender. With its memorable introduction to the series through Cecil's iconic character arc and its unique tank gameplay style, the Paladin would make its landmark as one of the most popular and favoured jobs in Final Fantasy, making it a quintessential entry to almost every game with a formal job system. And last, but certainly not least, we arrive at the Summoner. They would quite literally be a game changer within the franchise, as not only would the summons be aligned with the summoning mechanic, they would also be very important figures within the story and lore of multiple games, including Final Fantasy IV, 9, and 10. The Summoner job would make its debut in Final Fantasy III, with its lower ranking version being called the Evoker. Summoners were mainly tasked with summoning otherworldly beings to aid in combat, where they would execute an action upon being called. And with their collection of summons, which often grew with the game's progressions, they would deal damage or inflict status ailments with beings like Ifrit and Siren, or support and heal the party with beings like Carbuncle. In addition to summoning, summoners would also often possess secondary roles, being able to use White Magic and Black Magic. As summoners often had great story significance, the characters embodying the job would generally be considered important to each of their respective games. As such, the most noteworthy summoners in the series would include Rydia, Garnet, Aiko, and Yuna, the latter of which has been something of a representative of the role ever since Final Fantasy X released. Though the appearance of summoners would vary between the games, some conventional design traits would include green and white robes and horns on their heads, which served as a communication medium between them and the summons, much like an antenna. They would appropriately boast high magic stats, but were severely lacking in physical prowess. Summoners would largely have a reputation for being an iconic, story-centric job in light of their relationship with the summons, who were often divine and mystical beings invariably tied to the game's lore, and as summoners became a mainstay feature and fan-favourite element across the series, it would further elevate the summoner as one of the most beloved and fascinating jobs. And with that, we've reached the end. They were 7 of the most iconic jobs in Final Fantasy history. How do you feel about the list? Do you think there are any jobs that are more iconic than the ones we've selected? Let us know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Alright everyone, with that, this is Daryl signing out. I'd like to extend a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Benjamin Snow, The Livestream, Lord of Morning, and Gregory, who are super special Onion Knight supporters, and of course a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.